Welcome to CHIRLA TV, the immigrant voice. I am your host, Edgar Aguilar.
Diana Lucero.
And today we're joined by two special guests from CHIRLA, the Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights. We'll be talking about the 2020 census, its importance, and the latest developments. So today we have Mariana Magaña, who has been a political advocate for the past 7 years, as well as the director at CHIRLA of Policy and Advocacy, who has been holding that position for 7 years, Joseph Villela. Welcome, guys. Welcome to CHIRLA TV.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you. Can you both tell us a little bit about yourselves?
My name is Mariana Magaña. I just came on board with CHIRLA this year, so I've just been learning the process and learning what CHIRLA is all about. However, I myself am an immigrant from Mexico, a DACA recipient specifically, and so I have been involved in the immigrant movement since high school, since 2012, and I'm very excited to be here today.
My name is also Joseph. I'm also an immigrant. I've been at CHIRLA for the last 15 years as a director for 7 years, and during this time, one of the things that have continued to move forward is the engagement of immigrants and how we have changed the state of California to move a proactive agenda, but then at the federal level also getting some policy wins to make sure that our community feels safe and feel integrated.
And so you're both from Mexico?
Mm-hmm. That's correct.
So am I.
So am I.
But well, thank you so much for being here with us, and let's dive right into it. The 2020 census. What is it? What's going on?
So first, the 2020 census is something very important that happens every 10 years. So it's under the Constitution of the U.S. And one of the importance of the census is to make sure that we count every single person in every single state. And why is this important? Because every state, depending on the population, will receive two key aspects or two key ingredients, and that is money and political representation in Washington, D.C. California, Texas, and Florida are one of the states that have the highest population of immigrants and Latino population. And so if we don't get the count correctly, those states most likely are not going to receive the resources that they deserve, but then also the political representation might decrease.
So at the national level, in addition to immigration, what kind of issues are there in the census and in Congress as well?
Well, I think one of the things is that we have seen this administration attack towards immigrants, from A to C, and one of them is the census. And so we have seen the administration trying to undermine the process of the census, one, by not providing significant resources for the implementation, and two, making significant changes to the process. This is the first time ever that 50% of the respondents will have to be via online. And so that means that communities who do not have access to broadband with computer may suffer and they will not be counted. And this is critical in regards to resources and representation.
So people, this is the first time that it'll be split in physical, through the mail, and online. So would there be a possibility for people doing it twice? Be doing the census twice, for example?
We don't think so. I think there was a possibility that actually people will undercount themselves based on the lack of experience of actually doing online. Most of the data that we have is that people who are illiterate in regards to computer skills are low skill, uneducated, and also communities of color. That's one aspect of it. The second aspect is who has access to a computer and who has access to a broadband. And so those are communities who do not have access. And on top of that, if you're asking an immigrant family who only speaks Spanish, how to fill that in a form and then translate that into a computer form, and then maybe it's only translating to Spanish, and then our communities, immigrant communities, there's also a high rate of illiteracy. And so that's going to be the challenges that we don't foresee people counting themselves twice. We see people actually undercounting themselves.
I think another barrier to that is also the distrust that exists within communities of color and government agencies and government institutions. And I think that has been prominent in the past, right, due to the historical disenfranchisement of these communities. However, with this administration, we have told individuals to not open the door to government agencies such as ICE and federal agencies, right, unless they have a judicial warrant. But now we're asking them to respond to a government document, right? So how do we balance that to ensure that our communities do not go undercounted, specifically the youth and children who in the past have a record of being undercounted for many years?
So we understand how important it is to answer the census, especially in 2020. Can you discuss a little bit about how the Trump administration is seeking to undermine the census for 2020?
So the Trump administration, Secretary Ross decided to include a citizenship question, which has not been added in the census since 1950. Basically, what we see that as is another attack on the immigrant community. As Joseph mentioned, the census is used to allocate resources and for political representation. With California being one of the largest states, largest immigrant state, we know that the Trump administration has been at war with the state of California. And so right now that is currently pending in the courts, and we shall see what happens with that.
All right, thank you, thank you. We'll be right back, folks, with more on the 2020 census. Before we left, we were discussing the question in regards to the 2020 census, in regards to citizenship. So we mentioned how California is constantly at war with the Trump administration. So can we talk a little bit about the census question? Is it finalized? Where is it in the court right now?
So basically, it's a proposal that the administration just moved forward. So right now what happened is that there were more than 100,000 comments made after that proposal was put in place. Most of the comments said, like, we don't want that question. In addition to that, there has been several litigations brought up, including California and also not-profit organizations such as CHIRLA. So CHIRLA is one of the plaintiffs in one of those litigations. And so there will be a court hearing in January to assess whether or not the citizenship question will be added in the final questionnaire. The census has all the way into May of 2019 to finalize the questionnaire, start printing things out, and put the programming in place for people to fill it out in online. Our hope is that the courts will decide and will put an injunction into this question, and this question will not be added to the final census questionnaire. The main reason for that is that it will suppress the amount of respondents, especially among immigrant communities, but especially among families who have mixed status families, meaning those who are citizens and those who may be undocumented or have some sort of legal status.
Everybody deserves to be counted, right? Regardless of your immigration status?
Yes. So everyone, whether you're undocumented, legal permanent resident, or citizen, should respond to the census and shall be counted in the census.
Even babies, 1-year-olds, 2-year-olds?
Yeah, so children are one of the populations that tends to be underrepresented and undercounted in the census. And so this year there's a big push to ensure that children in the households are also counted.
Can we discuss a little bit more of the challenges? We know that the citizenship question isn't a for sure thing yet, but can we talk about the things that we've seen in the past that could relay over to the 2020 census?
So apart from the citizenship question, we have the technological challenge that Joseph already mentioned, how 50% of that is going to be done online. But another one is, ensuring that we count unconventional forms of housing, meaning, for example, a garage that turned into a home, a mobile home of a family that lives on a mobile home in the street. And how do we ensure that they receive the census form or the census invitation to fill that information online? The
other big challenge is language access. So the census will be translating a lot of the forms in 12 languages. But we know that our communities, immigrant communities, is very diverse, and some of those languages are not included. And so the question becomes, are people going to understand what's actually been asked in that question in the native country? And there's a big push to also include in those questionnaires and also on the online form languages from the API community, because those are the ones that are underrepresented also in the census.
The API community?
The Asian Pacific Islander community.
So those are some of the challenges that we're experiencing right now. You mentioned non-traditional housing. Besides being a mobile home or anything of that sort, what else is involved in that? Because I understand it could be more than one family living in one household, and then they would just be counted as one or something like that.
When there's more than one family living in the household, if they receive the census form, everyone in that household shall get counted. However, sometimes there's fear, right? Because individuals are not supposed to be living in such high numbers within a house, so people will undercount that, fearing that information might be disseminated to the wrong person.
How does the census work at the state and local level?
So I think at this point, there's barely some of states are getting ready to the implementation of the census in 2020, and California is one of those states that is advanced. And so the first step is the state has to create what is known as a complete count committee to get advice for experts on the field. And second is coordination with the counties and how those counties then start implementing the census. And the third part is how they're going to coordinate with the federal government in regards to who's going to count what and what the state is going to do. At this point, one of the big differences of the census this time around is that before in the 2010 census, CHIRLA and other nonprofit organizations, we were actually working hand in hand with the federal government and the Census Bureau to make sure that we count our communities. Unfortunately, due to the politics at this point, we're actually not working with the census at this point, and our relationship with the census at this point is a little bit tricky, given that they have a mandate to count everyone, but at the same time they represent an administration that has waged a war against immigrant communities. And so we are relying on the state and the county to fill the gap of what the federal government has not doing, but most importantly, gain the trust of immigrant communities for make sure that they count.
And so the way that the county works is the county also has a complete count committee. Under that complete count committee, there's also subcommittees. And so the way that they're gaining the trust of individuals like us and like our parents and our community members is by working with CBOs, so community-based organizations that are deemed more reliable or more trustworthy to get out not get out the vote, but get out information on what the census is.
Can we talk a little bit about what kind of questions they can find that are already finalized?
Well, the traditional question is, for instance, name, residence, income, language, how they describe themselves in regards to ethnicity. So those are like the very basic questions. I think what's going to be very difficult is how is that the citizenship question going to be placed, and how the citizenship question, if someone is filling out the form online, if they are not feeling that, for whatever reason, is they are going to be able to advance to the next question. And so there's still a lot of technical things that we haven't figured out yet. And unfortunately, the Census Bureau has not given us a lot of information at this point.
Thank you both for joining us today. We'll be right back, folks, with more on the 2020 census. Welcome back, folks. We're here joined with Joseph and Mariana from the policy department at CHIRLA, and we are here talking about the 2020 census. So it's really important for us to really educate ourselves. But I was really intrigued when you said that California is always at war with the Trump administration. Can we talk a little bit more of why California is currently being under attack and why we're so important for the 2020 census?
So California is the state with the largest immigrant population. And so as we have seen, Trump started his candidacy based off attacking immigrant and our immigrant community. So California has stepped up at the state level and some counties as well to protect the immigrant community. So now that the census is here, there was another attack with the citizenship question. And so California once again responded to that.
So we also talked about how there are certain populations that are hard to count. You mentioned one of them was the immigrants. What else is a hard population to count?
Hard to count populations include like low income, folks who didn't have the privilege to attain a higher education, communities of color, children, students, and folks who don't have a traditional home to live in.
So it is our responsibility to take the census. Regardless of what questions are asked, we should all be taking the census.
That's correct. And I think what is important is for folks to understand right now that the census starts in 2020. And the other thing that is going to be a big challenge is that in 2020, especially states like California, we have changed our primary elections. So now a lot of folks are going to vote in March. And so we're going to look at two different scenarios from big states such as California, Florida, and New York, in which a lot of states and a lot of folks are going to be busy in regards to the presidential elections. But at the same time, we have to run this census implementation, which is going to start from January all the way to April. So you're going to have national presidential campaigns going on at the same time. At the same time, we have to count everyone in every single state. And so that means that resources are going to be really limited for nonprofit organizations. And candidates are going to be attacking the census. That's our fear, that the Republican Party or any conservative party are going to try to attack or trying to scare our communities not to really count themselves. And in addition to why the census is important for resources, but then also political representation, based on that data, each state then moves in the next steps the next year, which is redistricting, which means that all the lines of political representation will shift based on that representation at the state level, but then also at the federal level. I think our communities need to understand that, one, they don't have to be fearful in regards to the census because there are several protections that under current federal law.
So it's important to note that even before the citizenship question was added, our communities were fearful of answering the census and responding to a government agency. But it's also important to note that there's protections in place at the federal level that prohibits that personal information from being shared with other federal agencies, right? And so we can ensure them that that information will be kept within the Census Bureau.
And also to add, any employee that works on the census at the federal level, there's two things that happens to them. One is that they take an oath, a lifetime oath, that they will not share any information or release any information from the census. That's one. And the second one is that if they do share that information, there are civil and criminal penalties that the federal government can go after them if they release that information. Lastly, if the citizenship question is finalized and actually added to the final questionnaire of the census, people should not be afraid that their address will be then highlighted at the federal level. The way that it will be counted is that there will be a map of all the people who are citizens or not, and that's the way that it will be conveyed who is a citizen or not. There will not be a specific address attached to a name, and so that's something that people should be aware of it. But we understand the fear, and the fear is real, and that's why for CHIRLA we're fighting at the national level and through the courts to make sure that the citizenship question is not asked.
Can we discuss what California has to gain and what we have to lose if we do a really good job at answering our census, and what do we lose if we do a horrible job at answering our census?
I think we've already touched upon this, but the allocation of resources, right? Our schools, our safety net programs like Medi-Cal, and other resources that go out to our community, our low-income, underserved, underrepresented communities. A lot of that is based on the census, and what we have to gain is political representation. We know how important those seats at the Congress level are in order to pass legislation that benefits our community. So if we do go underrepresented, undercounted, we could potentially lose a seat as well.
And I think the best way to describe it is that if you're tired of the street not really being maintained, if you're tired of the freeway, it's always packed, that's because the state does not have resources. And so it's important to know that the way that the bridges and freeways are built or repaired are to the census, because then we know how many people are living in a city or in a state, and that's how many dollars are then allocated for transportation purposes or fixing the roads, the bridges. So it actually goes back to the day-to-day issues from people going to the freeway or actually knowing how many schools are in that district.
So essentially, people can volunteer with CHIRLA to go canvassing, inform the public, and at the same time inform themselves and their community.
I think that the first step is right now is to know, one, that the census is coming. Two, that is the civil duty, civil responsibility for them to count themselves and everyone who lives around them, including children. Even if that children is just 1 month, 1 day, they need to count that child. And third, that they need to understand that under federal regulations they are protected and that they should not be fearful at this point of counting themselves in the census.
We need to keep those things in mind. We'll be right back here at CHIRLA TV, but don't forget to visit chirla.org for more information.
Welcome back. I'm your host, Diana. I'm here with Edgar and our two advocates from the policy department at CHIRLA, Joseph and Mariana. And we are here talking about the 2020 census. So we've already established how important they are. But we really wanted to talk about what our responsibility as individuals are. So filling it out and going out to volunteer. Can we talk about certain things that folks in power, like our Congress members, can do?
Yeah, so I think it's important to note that the citizenship question, if it's actually introduced or put in the questionnaire, Congress can actually pass a bill. And we were working last year to make sure that bill, one, was introduced, and second, to actually have a vote. And so the next step is if the litigations actually fail, we get denied or we lose that litigation, then the next step is for Congress to actually pass the bill that we have introduced last year. And so through that bill, we will demand the speaker to actually bring that bill to the floor and get a vote, an up and down vote. At the end of the day, no matter if you're a Republican or Democrat, the census is important to your district because that's how you get resources to actually make the lives of individuals better. And so that's why that bill is actually bipartisan, and we hope that the Republicans and Democrats will work together both on the House and the Senate to actually pass this bill next year to make sure that our communities are counted at the end of the day.
So we talked about Congress. Can we talk about what our state can do at a state level?
So at the state level, the state has allocated, as we mentioned, $90 million. And so those resources will be eventually disseminated down to the county level. And from the counties will be disseminated to CBOs, who are trusted messengers. And so I think the key right here is, once again, regaining the trust of our community to ensure that they do respond to the census, right? And I know a big part of this is, for example, mixed status families. So if we have a household which is composed of a mixed status family, which includes, it could be a U.S. citizen, legal permanent resident, and documented individual, how do we ensure that not only the citizen counts themselves, but also the undocumented individual or the legal permanent residents? Because as we mentioned before, the census is for everyone to be counted regardless of immigration status.
Not so long ago, I was in Sacramento and I was talking to one of our legislators down there, and they were asking me, like, how would you like to see these resources allocated. So I mentioned how we should put them into libraries, and libraries should have somebody on site because there's computers there if we have to find them on site. So resources like CHIRLA should be a housing for answering the census. What are other ways that you are talking to legislators and inviting them to help improve the answering of the census?
So at the county level, the Complete Count Committee has subcommittees. And so some of these subcommittees are made up of CBOs, community-based organizations, but the libraries are also really involved, right? So the libraries are also going to do their own part in reaching out to folks who come into the libraries to use the services to let them know, one, what the census is through trusted messengers, and also through the development of research that has been done to reach out to these communities. Additionally, the CBOs will also play their own part, not only in the initial messaging, but once the census questionnaires are sent out or are requested to be sent out via online, to ensure that folks who have questions can come in and there's a person designated in that community-based organization to answer their questions.
And I think what we hope is that the state and the federal level are able to do, or will allow us to do, is to make sure that we do unlikely events, such as have a carne asada or barbecue with a membership, to make sure that they actually come, gather around the park and then have fun, but at the same time fulfill our civil duty, and that is to fill out the census. And so that's something that I hope that our states were able to do. But I think we also urge other states to get their stuff together, such as Texas, Florida, New York, with heavy population of Latino immigrants, to get resources to their community if the federal government is not giving them, and making sure that regardless of the political ideology, that everyone should be counted. It is in our Constitution that everyone must be counted because of political representation, and make sure that they receive the fair share of resources.
Those are great ideas. Actually, a carne asada, gathering your neighbors, your family, your primos all together.
We saw how successful that was with the 2018 elections at CHIRLA. They had a party for the elections, right? And it was super successful. So that's why we're calling out to folks to please you have to do the census. So consider having the conversation with your family. And thank you once again, Joseph and Mariana, for joining us. And we'll see you again next Saturday, like always. Thank you, folks. Have a good day.